The scent of sugar and yeast was a shield against the world, a fragrant fortress that Elara Rossi built around herself every single day. It was nearly midnight, and the only light in the sweet proof came from the kitchen, a warm, golden square against the damp, dark street. Her hands, dusted with flour, were steady as she piped the final, intricate swirl of ivory buttercream onto a three-tiered wedding cake. Each rose, each delicate leaf, was a testament to order, to beauty, to things that made sense. This was her sanctuary, her carefully constructed life of quiet mornings and predictable afternoons. It was a life built on a foundation of forgotten ghosts. The back alley was cold, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the ovens. She heaved the bag of trash into the dumpster, the clang unnaturally loud in the silence. It was as she turned, wiping her hands on her apron, that the universe fractured. A car door shut with a soft, expensive click across the narrow street. Not the usual slam of a delivery truck or a weary neighbor. This was different. Her eyes, drawn by the sound, met a scene playing out like a grim pantomime under the flickering halo of a faulty street lamp. Two men stood over a third, who was on his knees. The man in the center was Kazimir Volkov. She didn't know his name, not then. All she knew was the absolute stillness of him, a predator poised at the moment of the strike. His face was carved from pale marble, his eyes twin voids of intent. There was no rage, no hesitation. Only a terrifying, pure purpose. The gun in his hand was a dark, compact thing. It didn't roar. It coughed once, a sound swallowed by the city's distant hum. The man on his knees folded silently into the shadows. And then Casimir's head turned. His gaze, empty and calculating, lifted from his work and found hers. Time stretched, snapped, and rewound itself in that single, paralyzing second. She saw the exact moment his analysis concluded, witness. Before a scream could even form in her throat, hard hands were on her, a thick arm wrapping around her waist, a palm clamping over her mouth, smothering the scent of vanilla with the smell of cheap cologne and cold metal. She was dragged backward, her worn sneakers scraping uselessly against the asphalt, the warm light of her bakery receding into a pinprick before vanishing entirely. The car was a black sedan, smelling of leather and antiseptic. No one spoke. They didn't blindfold her. That was the first true spark of terror. They didn't care what she saw. The drive was a blur of inverted streetlights and her own frantic heartbeat thudding in her ears. They led her into a building that was all silent elevators and hushed, minimalist opulence. The penthouse was a monument to cold wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering city, a view owned by a king. It was sterile, devoid of personal touches, a beautiful, empty shell. He stood by the window, his back to her, a silhouette against the urban constellations. When he turned, the city lights seemed to crown him. "Elara Rossi," he said. His voice was low, a vibration that felt like it was in her bones. 28. Owner of the sweet proof. No family. No spouse. No debts. He knew her. Of course he knew her. He had his men pluck her from her life, he would have known everything in minutes. She expected the gun. She expected the final, quiet cough. She braced for it, her mind screaming a frantic, silent goodbye to her ovens, her recipes, the simple life she had fought so hard to build. He gestured to a sleek sofa, an offer that felt like a command. "You have two choices," he stated, his tone devoid of all emotion. It was a business meeting. "The first is the obvious one. The one that ensures silence." He paused, letting the finality of that option settle in the sterile air between them. "The second is a partnership. A temporary one." Elara's breath hitched. "Partnership?" Her voice was a ragged whisper. "What are you talking about?" "You will be my fiancé," he said, the words so absurd they seemed to warp the very air in the room. "For 1 month. There will be public appearances. You will live here. You will act the part. In return, you walk away when our business is concluded, alive and with a generous severance package." "The reason?" she managed to ask, her mind reeling, trying to find the logic in the madness. "My rivals are looking for a weakness. A new, public relationship suggests stability. It suggests I am untouchable, grounded. It is a misdirection. You are the misdirection." He finally took a step toward her, and she saw the full intensity of his gaze, the chilling intelligence in those dark eyes. "Your life for a performance. Do we have an agreement?" Elara stared at this man, this ghost, this king in his glass castle. The warmth of her kitchen was a universe away. The scent of wedding cake was a memory. Here, in the chilling silence, there was only his offer. A gilded cage was still a cage, but it had a door that led out, eventually. She straightened her spine, meeting his gaze with a defiance she didn't feel. Her life, her hard-won peace, was being traded for a role. She took a shaky breath, the words feeling alien on her tongue. What are the terms of this partnership? The silence of the penthouse was a living entity, thick and heavy, broken only by the whisper of the climate control and the frantic drum of Elara's own heart. The partnership began not with a bang, but with the soft click of the lock on a door she was now forbidden to open without escort. Her new world was defined by edges, the sharp line of the modern sofa, the cold gleam of the marble floors, the impenetrable glass of the windows that showed her a city she could no longer touch. Casimir Volkov was a ghost in his own home, moving from room to room with a soundless efficiency that set her teeth on edge. His rules were simple, delivered in that same flat, unyielding tone. You do not leave. You do not use the phone. You are never alone with anyone but me. Your old life is on pause. Your new one begins now. The first day was a study in stillness. She sat, she stood, she paced the perimeter of the vast living area, a bird testing the bars of a gilded cage. He worked at a monolithic desk, his attention fixed on a series of screens, the blue light glinting off his sharp features. He was a statue of focused intent, and she was the chaotic, trembling variable he had been forced to introduce into his sterile equation. The tension was a wire pulled taut between them, humming with unspoken threats and a strange, unnerving curiosity. He was watching her, she realized, not just as a prisoner, but as a puzzle. He was waiting for her to break. On the second morning, driven by a deep, primal need for something familiar, she invaded his kitchen. It was a space of chrome and dark granite, spectacularly unused. She opened cabinets to find them nearly bare, containing only expensive, minimalist dishware. The refrigerator held bottled water, a few sparse ingredients, and nothing more. But in a pantry, she found flour, sugar, salt, and yeast. Staples. It was all she needed. She washed her hands, found a bowl, and began to mix. The sound of the whisk against the stainless steel was a rebellion. The scent of flour and yeast that began to rise was her flag planted on foreign soil. Casimir appeared in the doorway, silent, observing. He didn't stop her. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, before retreating back to his screens. The performance began that evening. A sleek black garment bag was delivered. Inside was a dress of emerald silk, a weapon of elegance. A woman arrived to do her hair and makeup, her touch impersonal, her chatter ceasing the moment Casimir entered the room. He was dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than her bakery's monthly revenue, and the transformation was jarring. The silent predator was now a devastatingly powerful aristocrat. He offered her his arm. It was not a request. Remember, he said, his voice low, you are in love with the idea of me. You are safe, you are cherished. You see a future. The gala was a symphony of light, sound, and suffocating opulence. 1,000 crystal shards reflected in 1,000 judging eyes. Elara clung to Casimir's arm, her smile a fragile, practiced thing. He was surprisingly adept at the charade, his hand a firm, possessive weight on the small of her back, his nods and quiet greetings perfectly calibrated. He introduced her simply. This is Elara. No title was needed. The implication was clear. She was his. Her moment came when an older man, a shipping magnate with a grip like iron and a bored, sharp-eyed wife, cornered them. Casimir's discussion with the man grew tense, hitting a wall of corporate stubbornness. The wife, Margot, stood slightly apart, her gaze critically sweeping over Elara. Most would see a socialite. Elara, a baker who had spent years reading customers, saw a woman starved for genuine attention. Abandoning the script, Elara turned to her, letting her own nervousness show just a little. Your necklace is breathtaking, she said, her voice soft. It reminds me of the sugar-spun sculptures we make for the most elaborate cakes. So delicate. It must have taken a master artisan. Margot's eyes, which had been glazed with boredom, sharpened with interest. You're a baker? A pâtissière, Elara corrected gently, leaning in. It's all about precision, structure, and knowing when to be bold with flavor. Much like style, I imagine. She launched into a description of a disastrous croquembouche she'd once made, turning it into a self-deprecating, funny story. Margot laughed, a real, unguarded sound. She began asking questions, drawn in by Elara's warmth and expertise. A few minutes later, she placed a hand on her husband's arm, cutting off his tirade. "Darling, Elara was just telling me the most delightful story. We must have them over for dinner soon. I insist." The shift was instantaneous. The magnate, baffled by his wife's sudden engagement, looked at Casimir with new respect. The deal, moments from collapsing, was suddenly back on the table. As they moved away, Casimir's hand tightened on her back. He didn't look at her, but his voice was a low murmur meant only for her. That was unexpectedly effective. Back in the penthouse, the facade crumbled. The silence returned, but it was different now, charged with the evening's unspoken victory. The adrenaline faded, leaving Elara shaking. She stood by the vast window, the emerald dress feeling like a costume she was desperate to shed. She heard his footsteps approach. He came to stand beside her, not touching, both of them reflected in the dark glass, a beautiful, broken couple. "Why did you do that?" he asked. His voice had lost its businesslike edge. "It was just a question." She wrapped her arms around herself. "It's what I do. I read people. I make them feel comfortable. It's the foundation of a good bakery." She finally turned to look at him. The city lights painted his profile in silver and shadow. The ghost was just a man, standing beside a woman he held captive, yet in that moment, the line between jailer and ally felt dangerously thin. He was looking at her not as an asset or a problem, but as a person. And in that look, Elara felt the first, terrifying crack in the foundation of her fear. The crack, once formed, did not heal. It widened, a silent, seismic shift in the geography of the penthouse. The sterile air now carried the permanent, comforting scent of baked bread, a fragrant rebellion that had become a tacitly accepted part of the atmosphere. Casimir no longer merely watched her from a distance, his observations had a new, unnerving focus. He noted the way she hummed an old tune while kneading dough, the specific way she organized his previously chaotic spice rack, the small sigh of contentment she gave when the morning sun hit the kitchen island just so. These were not the actions of a terrified hostage. They were the rituals of someone making a home, even in the belly of the beast. The performance continued. There were more galas, more dinners, more moments where her hand rested in the crook of his arm and her laugh, once brittle, began to sound disconcertingly real. In public, his touches became more frequent, more possessive, a hand on the small of her back, a brush of his fingers against her neck as he fixed the clasp of a necklace he had bought her. It was all for show, she told herself, a necessary part of the deception. But the lines were blurring, smudged by the quiet intensity in his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. The breaking point came not with a shout, but with a whimper. It was the deep, silent hour of the night, when the city's lights outside the window seemed to burn with a colder fire. A nightmare, a relic from the life before the penthouse, clawed its way up from the depths of her subconscious. It was not of Casimir or the alley, but of a different loss, a different kind of violence, the screech of tires, the shattering of glass, the profound, echoing silence that had followed. She woke not with a start, but with a choked scream trapped in her throat, her body drenched in a cold sweat, the phantom scent of gasoline and blood filling her senses. Before her racing heart could settle, his shadow fell across the doorway. He was there, silhouetted against the dim hall light, having moved with his characteristic silence. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't speak. He simply crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. The proximity was shocking, an invasion of the last private space she had. But his presence was not threatening. It was solid. An anchor in her storm of memory. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply waited, a patient, dark shape in the gloom. And the words, dammed up for years, began to spill out of her in a hushed, broken torrent. "They died," she whispered, the confession torn from a place she kept locked and buried. "My family. A car, black ice, it was so fast. I was supposed to be with them. A sleepover. I stayed home sick." The guilt, her oldest companion, wrapped around her throat. "I built the bakery from the insurance money. It was all I had left of them." The silence that followed was profound, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of her shared grief. Then, his voice, low and rough with a disuse that had nothing to do with sleep, cut through the dark. "My father sold my mother for a shipment of stolen rifles," he said, the words stark and brutal. "I was 8. I slept in a room with more rats than people. Trust was a lesson taught with a closed fist. This, he gestured vaguely at the opulent, cold room around them, is just a different kind of cage. But I hold the key. In that moment, the last vestiges of the ghost dissolved. He was just a man, a boy who had survived a different kind of wreckage. The carefully constructed walls between captor and captive, between monster and victim, crumbled into dust. The charged tension that had hummed between them for weeks snapped, transforming into something else entirely, a raw, desperate need for connection. He moved first, or perhaps she did. It was impossible to tell. Their coming together was not gentle. It was a collision, a frantic meeting of mouths and hands, a silent war against the loneliness that had plagued them both. It was lips seeking solace, hands clutching at fabric and skin as if trying to anchor themselves to this one, real thing in a world of lies and loss. There were no words of love, no sweet promises. There was only the frantic, shared language of two broken people trying, for one night, to feel whole. When he finally laid her back against the pillows, his body a welcome weight over hers, the last coherent thought in her mind was that the gilded cage no longer felt like a prison. It felt, terrifyingly, like a sanctuary. And when she met his gaze in the dark, the ghost of a man she saw looking back was one she no longer wanted to escape. The morning light that streamed into the penthouse felt different. It was no longer the cold, interrogating glare of her first days there, but a gentle, golden haze that seemed to bless the space. Elara woke wrapped in the scent of him, clean linen, expensive soap, and something uniquely Casimir, a scent that was now tangled with her own. His arm was a heavy, possessive weight across her waist, his breathing even and deep against her neck. For a single, heart-stopping moment, it was perfection. It was the kind of peaceful awakening she had forgotten could exist. The nightmare felt a lifetime away, soothed by the solid reality of the man holding her. But perfection, in their world, was a fragile illusion. She felt the exact moment he woke. The lazy relaxation of his muscles vanished, replaced by the instant, coiled alertness that was his default state. He did not pull away, but the air in the room shifted. The man who had held her in the dark was receding, and the dawn was reasserting himself. He shifted, rolling onto his back, and she saw his profile, sharp and pensive against the pillow. The silence was no longer comfortable, it was a chasm waiting to be filled. He was the one to break it, his voice raspy from sleep, yet already laced with that familiar, calculating tone. "The arrangement is working," he stated, as if reviewing a business report. "Better than anticipated. The Orlov deal was finalized this morning, thanks to your influence." Elara's heart, which had been soaring somewhere near the ceiling, began a slow, sickening descent. She pushed herself up, clutching the sheet to her chest, a flimsy shield against the sudden chill. "The arrangement?" she repeated, the words tasting like ash. He turned his head to look at her, and his eyes, which had been so warm and vulnerable hours before, were now guarded, assessing. "Our partnership. It requires modification. A more permanent structure." He began to lay it out, coolly, logically. A new contract. She would remain as his fiancée, indefinitely. The public facade would become their private reality. There would be allowances, of course. She could have the bakery back, under his protection. She would want for nothing. It was all so reasonable, so ruthlessly practical. He was offering her a gilded life, a crown of diamonds and chains. He was buying her, just as his father had traded his mother, only the currency was finer. Fury, hot and cleansing, burned through the last of her morning after haze. She shoved herself out of the bed, her body trembling not with fear, but with a profound, soul-deep betrayal. "You unbelievable bastard," she whispered, the words shaking. "You think this is a negotiation? You think what happened last night was part of the deal?" "It changes the terms," he said, his jaw tightening. He stood, a powerful, unyielding figure. "It simplifies things." "It complicates everything," she shot back, her voice rising. "I am not a business acquisition, Casimir. I am not an asset to be managed and secured with a new contract." She gestured wildly around the room, at the bed they had just shared. "This was real. Or did you just perform that, too?" His silence was her answer. The wall was back, higher and more impenetrable than ever. The ghost had returned to his haunt. The pain of it was a physical blow, sharper than any threat he had ever made. That was it, then. She had handed him a piece of her broken soul, and he had tried to file it away in a ledger. "Fine," she said, her voice going dangerously quiet. "The original deal stands. The month is almost up. I'm leaving." She walked to the closet, her back straight, and began pulling her few, simple clothes from amidst his tailored suits, stuffing them into her old duffel bag. "You cannot," he said, the words a low command. "Watch me." She zipped the bag with a definitive sound. "You can shoot me in the back if you want. But I am walking out that door. I am not your prisoner anymore. And I am certainly not your purchased bride." She turned to face him, a queen in nothing but a sheet, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen in her before. It was the fire of a woman who had lost everything once and had just discovered she had one thing left to lose, her self-respect. For a long moment, they stood locked in a silent battle of wills, the penthouse air crackling with the ruins of what they had almost built. The sound of the penthouse door being blown off its hinges was a thunderclap that shattered the world. The world exploded in a symphony of splintering wood and shattering glass. The massive penthouse door, a symbol of Casimir's impenetrable control, burst inward, hanging from a single twisted hinge. The air, which a moment before had been thick with the wreckage of their hearts, was now filled with the acrid smell of cordite and the aggressive shouts of men. 3 figures, clad in black tactical gear and wearing grotesque skull masks, flooded into the space, their rifles sweeping the room. The rival family. They had not just found a weakness, they had stormed the castle. Time seemed to fracture into a series of stark, frozen images. Elara stood paralyzed, her duffel bag a pathetic shield. She saw the lead intruder's eyes, cold and triumphant above his mask, lock onto her. The asset. The leverage. She saw Casimir. The shift in him was instantaneous and terrifying. The men who had just been trying to negotiate the ownership of her heart vanished, replaced by the primal, lethal force she had witnessed in the alley. His face became a mask of cold fury, his body coiling with a predator's grace. He didn't look at her as a lover or a prisoner, but as his. His to protect. He moved with impossible speed. A gun, seemingly materialized from the air, was in his hand. The first shot was not a warning, it was a statement. It caught the lead intruder in the shoulder, spinning him around with a grunt. Down. Casimir's voice was a whip-crack, meant for her alone. Elara dropped, scrambling behind the solid marble kitchen island as gunfire erupted, a deafening staccato that chewed up the pristine drywall and sent priceless art crashing to the floor. This was not the controlled violence of the alley. This was chaos. This was war. Bullets ricocheted off the marble near her head, and she squeezed her eyes shut, the sound of her own whimpers lost in the roar. She heard a man scream, a wet, gurgling sound that was cut short. She heard the sickening thud of a body hitting the floor. This was the reality of his world, a reality she had only glimpsed from the periphery. It was brutal, ugly, and final. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos, Casimir's voice, closer now, gritted with pain. Elara. The panic room. Code 7-8-2-3. The panel behind the bookshelf. Go. Now. He was hurt. The knowledge was a bolt of pure ice through her veins. He was buying her time with his own blood. And in that moment, crouched behind an island, surrounded by violence, Elara made her choice. She was not a liability to be protected. She was not a prize to be won. She was his partner. Her eyes scanned the kitchen, her baker's mind, used to precision and timing, clicking into a terrifying new focus. She saw the heavy cast-iron skillet she had used to make him pancakes 2 mornings ago. She saw the industrial-sized can of flour. As a masked man rounded the corner of the island, his rifle raised, she didn't scream. She stood, swinging the skillet with all her strength. It connected with his masked head with a satisfying, metallic clang. He staggered, dazed. Before he could recover, she grabbed the can of flour and hurled its contents into the air, creating a thick, blinding cloud. Coughs and curses erupted from the intruders. In the confusion, a single shot rang out from Casimir's position, and the flour-dusted man fell. She had created an opening. She had fought back. The silence that fell was more deafening than the gunfire. It was a thick, heavy thing, punctuated only by the ragged sound of their breathing and the faint, rising wail of sirens in the distance. The white dust settled like strange snow over the wreckage of the penthouse and the 2 still forms on the floor. Casimir emerged from his cover, his left arm hanging at an awkward angle, blood soaking through the sleeve of his shirt. His gaze found her, standing amid the chaos, covered in white powder, the cast-iron skillet still clutched in her hand like a warrior's relic. The look in his eyes was not one of gratitude, but of awe. Of absolute, undeniable reverence. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, ignoring his injury, and his good hand came up to cup her face, his thumb smearing through the flour on her cheek. "Idiot," he breathed, the word laced with a fervent, desperate affection. "You were supposed to run. You were bleeding," she said simply, her voice trembling, the skillet clattering to the floor. The last of her resistance shattered. The contract, the deal, the threats, it was all meaningless ash. All that remained was this, the raw, unvarnished truth between them. Weeks later, the scent of sugar and yeast had returned, but it was no longer a shield. It was an invitation. The bell above the door of the sweet proof chimed, and he stood there, filling the doorway. His arm was in a sling, a stark white reminder of the life he led, of the life he had dragged her into and then fought to the death to protect her from. The penthouse was being rebuilt, but he had come here, to her sanctuary. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the counter where a fresh batch of cannoli sat cooling. He took one, his movements deliberate, and took a bite. He closed his eyes, a slow, almost imperceptible relaxation softening the hard lines of his face. When he opened them, his gaze was clear, vulnerable in a way she had only seen once before, in the dark. "The deal is over," he said, his voice quiet, meant only for her in the warm, quiet space. "You are free. The debt is paid. There are no more contracts." He took a step closer, his good hand reaching for hers, his fingers lacing through hers with a certainty that felt like a vow. "But I am not. I am not free of you, Elara. I don't want to be." He looked around the bakery, at the proof of her soul, her resilience, her life. "Stay. Not because you have to. Because you want to." Elara looked at their joined hands, at the man who was both a monster and her salvation. He had seen her at her most broken, and she had seen the boy who slept with the rats. He had offered her a cage, and she had shown him what a home could be. There was no more performance. There was only this choice. She squeezed his hand, a slow, sure smile touching her lips for the first time without any artifice. "The ghost is finally seen," she whispered. "And I like what I see." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, and in the warm, flour-dusted silence of the bakery, with the taste of sugar on his lips, Casimir Volkov was finally, completely, home. Did Elara and Casimir's dangerous love story capture your heart? If you crave more tales of passion, danger, and redemption, subscribe to the channel for exclusive bonus scenes, character interviews, and first looks at new stories. Let us know which couple you'd like to see next.